Hello and welcome to today's episode of Craftcast, the Freemasons podcast. How are we all today?
I'm very well, actually, Stephen.
Not too bad, thank you, Stephen.
And birthday congratulations are in order. Happy birthday, James.
Thank you very much. Yes, we are recording this episode on my birthday, so I've made a special trip down for this, but there's nowhere I would rather be.
That is commitment.
Than sat with you two in this studio today.
You're an old man now. I mean, you've probably not got that... not that many commitments.
Did you use your freedom pass to get down today? Or?
I did, yes.
Well, I say now.
The ripe old age of 32, James.
32, I know, absolutely ancient really, with my my beige trousers on and my anorak. And no, I don't feel old. You're as old as you feel.
That's true. Stephen, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great, thank you.
Yeah, brilliant.
Glad to actually have my chair back because James nicked it last time, so...
Yeah, we have two really comfy chairs in the recording studio and two chairs that are not as comfortable, that sort of thing that you have
politically correct term, not as comfortable.
Yeah, that you sort of would like a torture implement. I was in the sort of Spanish Inquisition era. It would definitely elicit some confessions if they were meant to sit in this chair for more than an hour.
Stephen was absolutely horrified last time we recorded an episode, and he walked into the studio and saw me sat in his chair. You looked at me with an absolute disgrace on your face.
It was the disrespect, to be honest.
I know, but it's his birthday today, so
yeah.
He should get a comfy chair.
Does that mean I can sit in Stephen's chair, even though it's the same chair? Just the principle. I want to sit in his chair.
I don't think it does. Stephen, who do we have on today?
Right, well, on today's episode we have Right Worshipful Brother Geoffrey Dearing, the President of the Board of General Purposes, and we are delighted to have him come in and talk about his role in all things Freemasonry.
So Geoffrey, thank you so much for joining us today. We always start with this question, but how did you come into Freemasonry? What lodge did you get initiated into, and how did that come about?
My mother lodge is the Douglas Lodge number 1725 in Maidstone, which is in the Masonic province of East Kent. I had two colleagues who were senior to me in my professional law practice, and they were both Freemasons, and they spoke to me very carefully, giving very little away, but I knew them well, had great respect for both of them, and I thought, well, if it's something that they valued, I suspect I would value it as well. And that's literally how I started, and found myself on a desperately cold night in a medieval building which was built in the reign of Richard II in the middle of Maidstone, and it really was cold because the heating had failed in the lodge room. We had new heating after I'd been initiated.
Oh, right.
And it was quite an experience, and I thought that was all part of what you had to go through for an initiation. But yes, it was quite an experience. I do remember it. I mean, I remember the day.
Well, I was going to ask, do you remember it? But clearly the most prominent thing is the weather.
Yes, the temperature had a permanent etch on my brain. Also, it just so happened that the then provincial Grand Master in East Kent was a member of the lodge, and he was there that evening, so that made it quite special as well. So that'll stick in my brain. Yes.
Fantastic. Now, it's very likely, Geoffrey, that there'll be a number of recent initiates listening to this. Do you have any advice for them? As a recent initiate, you've just entered into Freemasonry. What would you recommend for them?
Relax. It comes from seeing other ceremonies, seeing what you've been through, and if you have any questions, there'll be people in your individual lodges who you relate well to. Have a chat with them about it, and they'll help you and answer your questions.
Absolutely. And as we know, Geoffrey, you were formerly the Provincial Grand Master for East Kent. How useful have you found that role in your current role as President of the Board of General Purposes?
Well, this is a personal comment, but I've found it invaluable. The reason I found it invaluable, if I look at big picture, Freemasonry in the provinces, our 47 provinces, is 75% of all Freemasonry in this country.
Yeah.
I mean, the Met's a massive area with a huge number of lodges. That's 25%. And we've got many districts, as everybody knows, but the numbers aren't huge. So that the largest proportion of members are in the 47 provinces. If I break it between districts, Met, and our provinces in our jurisdiction in this country. So the experience of having been a provincial Grand Master and Grand Superintendent was helpful in a number of respects, and having that background and understanding the issues relevant from the lodge into the province, it's been really helpful when I'm looking at the situation from the perspective of United Grand Lodge of England and the provinces and the lodges, and I hope that I'm able to communicate and understand the issues, which I do understand and I do respect. And if I could illustrate what we've done supporting sort of where I come from, I've always been a great believer in the regional communication groups, so that you have 9 regional communication groups, and each of those groups represents what goes on in that area. Each of the provincial Grand Masters will be a member of a regional communication group, and it made enormous sense to have working parties both in membership, because it's such an important subject, and in communications and marketing, and to have a representative from each of those 9 RCGs and metropolitan. So you've got everybody represented in this country. And we must never forget our districts. We stay in touch with our districts, and I think we're in better touch with them than perhaps we've been in the past. That needs to continue. But it's been enormously helpful to have the issues that we're finding in the provinces at a committee meeting, which is based in London, and the impact that then those discussions have are truly reflective, and they help us with trying to make the right decisions.
I think as a young Freemason, a question that I've had more or less since I found out about the Board of General Purposes is exactly what you do. And from my perspective, I guess it's sort of very vague, and I don't really understand exactly what makes up the board and sort of what each role entails. So, for example, why do you have 5, 10 members, whatever, and what does each one do? And is it a specific, I think you're good for that role, so you're going to come on board, or it's, we need someone to do this job, so let's find someone to do it?
Stephen, I know you will have read the Book of Constitutions from cover to cover.
Of course, yeah.
Absolutely.
Which sets out what the Board of General Purposes consists of.
Yeah.
And then below that, in the regulations that follow, it covers what the Board of General Purposes is responsible for, what it does. You can substitute the word chairman for president, because that's what I do. I chair that particular board. The skill set of the people on the board is critical. The board have a certain amount of autonomy in terms of who they bring in. They have the power to make committees that report to them, and there are something like 14 or so committees, believe it or not, who report in, covering the whole range of issues, including your world of communications, the world of membership, external relations. That's a major issue. That's our relationship with other Grand Lodges, those that have similarities to us in the sense that we recognise them as a Masonic Grand Lodge in other jurisdictions. And believe it or not, there are now over 210 of those, between 210 and 220 around the world, and our Chancellor will attend meetings. He'll go to the odd global meeting, but also European meetings. And there's a huge amount of interchange.
Shout out to very worshipful Brother Paul Engine there.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, and Paul does a lot of work, and I've as president, attended, and I do attend all of the External Relations Committee meetings, and I've learnt a lot from that, and it's very important because the United Grand Lodge of England has been here for 300 years. Other Grand Lodges look at what we do, and they want to get our reaction
model,
to something that they have that's relevant to them, and they like to have our agreement or support for issues that they want to do. So it's a really important role, and I've been very impressed actually with the discussions and the way that UGLE is thought of throughout the Masonic world. It has a high standing, and it's very important that that's maintained.
So, Geoffrey, you've given us a sort of taster there of some of the things that the Board of General Purposes is involved with. If I could just ask you, what's the relationship like and the dynamic like between the Board of General Purposes and the rulers in the craft? And where do they come into the decision-making process? Where does the board come in? How does that balance together?
As the politicians always say, that's a really good question. And it is a really good question. Let's understand who does what. I don't really have anything to do with the ceremonial, but any questions relating to the craft in general are within the responsibility of the Board of General Purposes. That's set out in the Book of Constitutions. So all the administrative features, all the investments, all the property, all the finances, are matters which relate to the craft. So the board's responsible for quarterly communications, responsible for all of you sitting here. So the board operates all of the, let me call it administration functions, but there are also other aspects to that, and it's not dissimilar from being involved in a business with a lot of different areas, or if you like, subdivisions. And that is what we do, but it's essential, obviously, that the rulers who are the public face of Freemasonry, and whilst they have their offices, the rulers are exactly what the word says. So the Grand Master has considerable powers, and the rulers, both individually and collectively, and through the Grand Master's Council, are absolutely key in advice given to the Grand Master and in making sure they're comfortable with the way everything develops. So there are a huge number, James, to answer your question, of occasions where I will have a conversation with the rulers, so the rulers are informed and aware of the thinking and where one's going. And it's very important that there is that link and discussion, because it's very much a team organisation. We're all trying to do the right thing, the best thing. And I've always been someone who takes the view that what you do needs to be clear, it needs to be transparent, and it needs to be discussed.
Conceptually, would you sort of maybe say that this is in a way similar to how you've got royalty in Parliament, in terms of you've got people who run the day-to-day, and then those that are the figurehead of the organisation?
Yes, I mean, I think the rulers carry, if you like, the spirit of Freemasonry, which is an awesome responsibility, and of course they head all our ceremonials. The board looks after the functions, if you like, the business functions, the administration, everything to do with the background to support Freemasonry. And it's really important how that works. So I've always been a great believer, having been a provincial Grand Master, the province has got to find a way of communicating well with its individual lodges. And that's easier said than done, because certain lodges in certain parts of the country consider themselves almost as an independent state. Well, they're not an independent state. We're all subject to our Grand Master. We all serve at his pleasure at the end of the day, and we all exist at his pleasure at the end of the day. And it's terribly important to have consistency across the entire country in the way that we do things and how and what we say. So I'd hope that there's a consistency in the podcasts, because you're talking to a lot of people with different positions in the organisation. But there should be a number of common themes which actually stand well together. And I think you've probably got more of that now, dare I say it, than might have been obvious in the past. So the communication and the discussion is absolutely key between the lodge and the province and the United Grand Lodge of England, the rulers and the board, or representatives of the board, so that we know what's going on. certain issues need to remain confidential until they're going to be acted upon. Otherwise, your approach isn't complete until the final decisions have been made, and you don't want to go off in a direction where you haven't got the complete picture available. So it's very important that you get the complete picture, which is a classic reason why the strategy, where it's been discussed in a small committee since May of 2020, and again, one of my privileges is to sit on that committee to a point where we're now ready to go and talk to every Freemason about what the strategy is, and Sean will know, and your team will know, that we've had 22 iterations.
Oh, yeah.
I think so. In terms of developing it and getting it to the stage where everybody's happy with it for delivery to the whole of Freemasonry, it takes time. So when it gets to that point, then communicate it, and that's where we are.
Over your membership in Freemasonry, you've personally obviously made quite a clear, massive contribution to the organisation. And in that time, it's changed a lot, I imagine, from what I've heard from many a member, that it's a very different organisation now than what it was, let's say, 25 years ago. So over the next, let's say, 25 years, what do you see the organisation becoming? What do you hope it becomes?
I think you go back to my starting point, which is we are a membership organisation. And what I never lose from my mind is the importance. You need to look at it from the point of view of all members. And one of the great things about Freemasonry is that it's a very varied bunch of men, and that's good. Also, I think one should never lose sight of the fact that part of Freemasonry is very much about the self-improvement of the individual, which is a strong issue, and based on those principles that I've mentioned. So my hopes are that the membership will strengthen, that we will work well with the new strategy, and the membership numbers will increase from where they are, which helps everybody. It helps individual provinces, it helps Masonic centres, and I think it will lead to great enjoyment within the individual lodges. So they're all good things. I also think that as I reflect, because I'm getting on a bit with all you young people around me, I also reflect. I was very fortunate in my time and in terms of what one was able to deal with in business and how circumstances were. It was quite there's a long history of it, and there were ups and downs, etc. But if I look at where we are now, we've had nothing like, in recent years and in my time, I believe, the sort of threat level that we're seeing now affecting individual stability. I mean, we have, if you think of what's going on in the world in the bigger sense, that leads to a certain amount of instability, doesn't it? I mean, look at the impact.
Yeah.
I look at my role and I suddenly see a figure which tells me that our gas bill in this building has increased because we had an agreement, and the agreement came to an end this year. But our gas bill is now 6.5 times greater than it was 12 months ago.
Wow.
Now, never in my time have I ever been faced with a statistic like that, with an overhead increasing that much. And then you've got to be able to find the wherewithal to pay for it and actually come up with an arrangement in the future where you give it the maximum protection. What do you do on the back of that? What is your thinking about power supplies and what we're going to use in the future, and how do we do that? And I suspect these considerations will be applying across every Masonic centre in the country, and there are a lot of them. So it's issues like that which certainly I've not come across before, and I think the uncertainty now, I mean, I can go back because I'm an old chap now.
It's all right, so's James.
Rude.
I go back to how it was when, for the first time, property values went down. Never happened before.
Oh, right.
And they went down. Why did they go down? Because, you'll find this hard to believe, chaps, the base rate for the Bank of England went to 15%. But they were in the days when the government set the base rate. And I remember that well, because I had a mortgage, and the impact of that sort of percentage was enormous. So we've had those sorts of experiences, but I think in an uncertain world, the friendships and the support that Freemasonry offers is hugely important in an uncertain world, and the principles on which it's based, I think, help one get through all that. So I think its place in the world is probably as important, if not more important, than it's ever been. And it's quite interesting to me, that thought. And to answer a question you asked me, Stephen, a long time ago, who's on the board and what the makeup is, just as a matter of interest. I have a copy of the 1926 Constitution, and I read that, and there were the best part of 50 people on the board.
Oh, wow.
And it covered everybody. It covered all the rulers. There used to be a president of benevolence. I suppose that's a forerunner of the MCF. And a whole range of different offices. So the Chancellor would have an office, the DC would have an office. They would all be part of the board. And in addition to that, there were 32 other members, in addition to the nominated people. That actually became unworkable, which is why it was changed. So what you now have, and it's set out in the Book of Constitutions, you've got a president and a deputy president, grand treasurer, grand secretary, in a support role, so they're sort of ex officio attendees. You've got the deputy grand secretary, assistant grand secretary, because between them they're dealing with a whole mass of administration that we actually need to have available at the board. And then the financial aspects are really, really important. And we're very fortunate because we have the Metropolitan Grand Master, who back in the day was a very good chartered accountant, or is a very good chartered accountant. You've got a Grand Secretary who is the finance director of one of our large companies, with very good handle on the sort of issues that we're having to deal with at the moment. And in real time, in terms of what's going on now, what's available now, what we need to do. We have good aspect now with the Provincial Grand Master. So when a Provincial Grand Master comes onto the board, we need to have at least 3. We also have the Metropolitan Grand Master. And it's not just about where you are, although we do pretty much have a view from the country as a whole. But we have Ian Chandler, who you've already had a session with. So southeast, you've got Stephen Varley, who's in the north, and you've got, again, it's southern, but the skill set in dealing with people are enormous. With the PGM of Hampshire Isle of Wight, Right Worshipful Brother John Whittaker. So it's the skill set, as well as the area, becomes important. And if I think that there's a skill set missing from the board, I've got the power to go to the board and say, I think we need another director. This is who I have in mind, and this is why. What do you think? And then if we agree on that, then someone else will come in. Head of audit is on that committee. We now have, which we need to have, a remuneration committee, you'll be pleased to hear, so that's dealt with in a very modern, sensible way. Audit, we have a risk committee, and risk committee are represented on the board as well. We have the president of the MCF is on the board now, so we have that input. I have, you asked what one does as president, but the president has an automatic seat on the trust board, although it's an independent charity, the trust board of the museum.
Is there any scope to potentially have a DGM on that board, purely to sort of bring in some additional inclusivity from the districts?
It's a really good question. Another really good question.
Thank you.
And I've thought about it. And one of the difficulties is that Freemasonry is very different in different parts of the world. And if you're looking at DGMs, what you're talking about with district Grand Masters is where in the world are they, and are the issues that they have relevant to everybody, or even to other district Grand Masters? And the answer I think you'll find is that yes, I think it would be quite interesting to give that further thought, to have that input. But the individual districts are very different.
Of course,
and certainly as I look at the makeup of the districts, how they're dealt with, what they do, where they are, the backgrounds will be very, very different. And the thing about the board is we really need, you've got to have the view across the piece. Having said that, I do think it's highly relevant that the issues of district Grand Masters, because there are issues which affect district Grand Masters, one of them is the question of communication. Does UGLE know that the districts are out there? Yes, it does. Yeah. Does it think of them? Yes, it does. But I think if one had a representative in the future on the board but you'd then have to work out, well, how would you deal with that? Because the different areas of the world are so different, and a number of thoughts go through my mind that what you might have is a sort of 3-year appointment, and then it moves to another district, and so you move it around, so you get a thread really across the whole of our jurisdiction. I think that would be important. So it's in embryo. It's being thought about, and there needs to be more thought. We need to get it right, but it is something we thought about, and the point's well made.
So Geoffrey, it's clear that you give quite a large amount of your time to Freemasonry, but I'm curious, I'm sure the listeners are curious as well. What are your other hobbies? Well,
if you can find some more time in my days, I'll be really grateful, James. No, I do. I've always been a bit of a sports nut. So in my younger days, I used to play league table tennis and cricket. And then, people don't realise, but if you play serious table tennis, you can be incredibly fit.
Yeah.
I'm no longer incredibly fit. So that had to go. And I was a quick bowler, and that went in when I got to 30. That was the end of that. So golf. And I still play golf. I'm playing in a golf competition on Sunday, this Sunday, and being very privileged to visit some wonderful places, certainly across the country. Scotland, Ireland, terrific fun, and a lot of good people. So golf has been good. The other weakness I have is I've always liked motor cars, and as a youngster, I probably spent as much on motor cars as I did on a house.
Oh dear.
Huge mistake.
You said your bowling went at 30, did you say, roughly?
30 years of age. Yeah.
Don't look at me, Stephen.
James, cough.
The arm wasn't as good.
James is a spin bowler.
That's my bowling career.
I switched to spin bowling, but I wasn't that good at that.
Oh, right, okay.
But I enjoyed my cricket. I've always liked cricket, and still, I like watching the internationals. It's great fun. And I've always liked motor cars. The one thing I did do again after my cricketing days. In fact, during my cricketing days as well, navigating rally cars.
Oh, wow.
And for several years, I competed in the British Championship, and we were quite successful. We had a lot of fun.
What a claim to fame that is!
Out of nowhere. Yeah.
Wow. One of my heroes in rallying, an Englishman called Roger Clark, and a good friend of mine acquired his works Escort, and we've used that car in classic rallying. So that's been tremendous fun. We've done the British Historic Championship in that car, and that car is now being completely rebuilt. I'm retired now. It's all too quick for me because the sort of rallying I do is where you've got pace notes, and you're strapped into this machine where your seat is literally bolted to the floor. You have a big roll cage around you, and you're going absolutely flat out through the forests and on closed roads, and it's very exciting. Gets the adrenaline going. And I've loved it, but that's all behind me now. But I still like classic cars. So I've got one classic car, which is in the garage, which is a lovely old 3.8 Mark II Jag with the HKE engine and the old Morse machines. And that's now more than 50 years old. It was built before I started Freemasonry. But it's a lovely machine to drive, a lot of fun. So There you are. I do have life
There we
outside
go.
Freemasonry.
Even before James was born.
If you keep going on about my age, we can go off people. You can really go off someone.
Geoffrey, we come to that stage of today's episode where we enter our quick fire round, where we're going to fire off 5 questions at you.
Yep.
And if you answer as quickly as you can, that would be brilliant. So, Brother Dalton.
Favourite meal?
Roast lamb, preferably from Romney Marsh in Kent. Roast potatoes, nice gravy, or roast beef, Yorkshire pud, etc.
Classic.
Geoffrey, favourite drink?
At the meal table, I'm quite partial to the odd glass of wine.
Just one.
Or two. In the pub, I would probably have a pint of Guinness with you.
Excellent choice.
Favourite sports team?
Well, that's a good question, because in motorsport, where I've taken great interest, there are a number of teams, but they're teeny-weeny. If you're talking about big stuff, well, obviously Kent County Cricket would be
Of course.
my cricket team. And you'll be surprised at this, but in rugby, I always, they're in terrible trouble now, but I was always a fan of Wasps. In football, the colours are similar to Wasps, and again, you'll be surprised, but it was the first, in those days, first division football club I ever visited, was Wolverhampton Wanderers. And so I've been to Wolves many times and enjoy myself up there. The sense of humour in the stand at Wolves over the years, because I'm in the home grandstand, absolutely wonderful.
You've got to have a sense of humour to be a Wolves fan.
Well, some people say that.
Geoffrey, favourite word?
Well, yes, that's an interesting question as well. I love the English language. So, do I have a favourite word? I think if you ask anybody who works with me or has worked with me in recent times, they'll say, Geoffrey, your favourite word is aligned.
Oh, right.
Because I'll use the word aligned when I'm talking about the museum needs to be aligned with Freemasonry. The Freemasonry needs to be aligned with the museum. Ditto with the MCF. Ditto with provinces and UGLE, RCGs and UGLE, and lodges with their provinces.
Yes.
Aligns rather well with your role.
Alignment's absolutely key. British rowing went through complete regeneration from getting virtually no medals to becoming unbelievably successful.
Yeah.
And the word that came to me from a member of the crew who wrote this very good book about how that happened, and his answer was having proper alignment between all the parts that go to make a team. And I think proper alignment of all the parts that go to make our team are really important.
And finally, childhood hero.
I'll give you one in sport and one in a bigger sense. You're sitting in the Churchill area of Freemasons Hall, and Sir Winston Churchill was a hero and remains something of a hero for me because of his leadership skills.
Yeah.
And all you've got to do is go back and think about the effect on the population at the time when he made his speeches. And they still bring a lump to my throat when I hear them now.
Yeah.
Absolutely incredible man. So in terms of leadership, I think Winston Churchill was my not only childhood hero, but if you like, adult hero.
Yeah.
In terms of sport, I always used to take a great interest when I was sent miles away for school in listening to motor races. And my hero from those days, and he was enormously successful, was Sterling Moss, because he wasn't always in the best car, but he was a phenomenal driver. And I have met him, and a really nice man.
Geoffrey, thank you very much for taking the time to joining us on this episode of Craftcast. It's been an absolute pleasure to welcome you, and we hope to have you back again soon in the future.
My pleasure. Lovely to be with you all. Thank you.
So, brethren, what a fascinating conversation with the President of the Board of General Purposes. How did we find it?
Yeah, very interesting.
Very interesting.
Very interesting man. Very interesting to find out all the intricacies of the board and how it all works, how Freemasonry is run.
Yeah, I don't think you realise what goes on behind the scenes. And actually, one thing I just want to pick up on before we finish is when he was talking about the price of the gas bill in this building. It does show that Freemasonry, UGLE is aligned with its members and what's going on out there in the wider world. It really does listen and feel the same things that the members do as well.
Geoffrey would be pleased to hear that word.
Yeah,
aligned.
Yeah. I chose it specifically, yeah.
And we will be turning off the light when we leave the podcast studio. Doing our bit.
So you can listen back to this and all previous episodes of Craftcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any podcast platform of your choosing. Feel free to email us podcasts@ugle.org.uk and tweet us at UGLE_Grand Lodge, United Grand Lodge of England on Facebook, and Instagram us as well. We'd love for you to get in touch. And that's Craftcast. We'll see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening.
Craftcast, the Freemasons podcast. The podcast is hosted by Sean Butler, Stephen Watley, and James Dalton. The producer is Marta Zandri, and the podcast is edited by Trisonic.